It's 1996. You're sitting across from a very smart economist, tenured, published, respected. And you say, I have a thought experiment for you. One encyclopedia is backed by Microsoft, professional writers, professional editors, managers making sure every page is on schedule and on budget. A polished product sold commercially to millions of paying customers. The other encyclopedia has no company behind it, no salaries, no qualifications required. It's built by tens of thousands of volunteers, people giving 20, sometimes 30 hours a week. And when it's done, it'll cost nothing to use. Free. For anyone. Forever. Fast forward 15 years. Which one still exists?
The Microsoft one. That's not a hard question. That's not even interesting.
No, it really isn't. On October 31st, 2009, Microsoft shut and carted down. The encyclopedia built by professionals, funded by one of the richest companies in history, gone. Wikipedia, the impossible one, built by amateurs, for nothing, had 17 million articles in 270 languages and was the most visited reference site on Earth. The conventional view of human motivation has no clean explanation for that. This is Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us, by Daniel Pink. And the question this book spends 250 pages answering starts exactly here, at this gap, between what we expect will motivate people and what actually does.
So the smarter vet, the one with all the money and the professional structure, it just lost? It doesn't even exist anymore?
It doesn't exist anymore. Pink is a journalist by training, not a psychologist, not an economist, which gives Drive a particular quality. He translates work that has lived in academic literature for decades, but rarely reached the people who needed it most. His sources are serious. Self-determination theory from Deci and Ryan, behavioral economics from Kahneman and Ariely, creativity research from Immobile at Harvard. Hundreds of peer-reviewed studies across cultures, income levels, professions. His argument, underneath all of it, is simple and uncomfortable. We've been running the wrong operating system. Pink calls the dominant model Motivation 2.0. Two principles. Almost invisible because they're everywhere. Reward the behavior you want. Punish the behavior you don't. If you do this, then you get that. Simple. Elegant. And for a certain kind of work in a certain kind of world, it worked. The problem is, the world changed, the work changed, and the model didn't. And now it's producing outputs that nobody designed and nobody wants.
So this is baked into how schools work, how companies work, how parents...
Baked in, and largely invisible because we've been inside it so long, most of us can't see the edges. Here is what I want to plant right now. We'll come back to it near the end. Economists from MIT, Carnegie Mellon, and Kelley University of Chicago ran a study, commissioned by the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. Their hypothesis was standard. Bigger rewards produce better performance. That's the foundation of every bonus structure, every commission plan, every incentive program ever designed. In 8 of 9 tasks, they found the opposite. I'll give you the full finding in a few minutes, but I want that sitting in your head as we go. Okay, but how does an operating system metaphor actually help us understand motivation? Like, what does that actually mean? It means this. Just like a computer's OS is the invisible layer that shapes everything running on top of it, every program, every function, every result, a society's motivational assumptions are the invisible layer that shapes how organizations are built, how children are educated, and how people think about their own drives. You don't usually see it, you just live inside it. And when it becomes incompatible with the world it was designed for, you don't get a loud crash. You get slow, strange, persistent failures. Things that shouldn't be hard become hard. People who should be engaged aren't. Results that should follow from incentives somehow don't.
So the failures aren't the problem. The failures are the symptom.
Exactly. And the source of the problem, the actual code, is what Pink spends the book dismantling and replacing. Here's what makes Drive different from most books that challenge conventional wisdom. Pink doesn't just tell you the old system is wrong, he shows you the research, in detail, with names, institutions, replicated findings. Research that's been sitting in academic journals for 30 years, while business, schools, and families kept doing the thing the research says doesn't work. That gap between what the science has known and what institutions have actually practiced is one of the more sobering threads in the book.
So people in labs were finding this stuff out, and no one was listening.
Pink would say, some people listened, the wrong people, and the right people had too much invested in the old model to update their assumptions. So, that's where we're going. First, how the old system got built, and why it made sense in the world it was designed for. Then, what the science actually found when it tested the assumptions. And finally, what the alternative looks like, and why it works. Let's start at the beginning, with a man named Taylor and a factory floor, and the set of beliefs about human beings that have been running the show ever since.
Every operating system has an inventor. Ours was named Frederick Winslow Taylor, and what he built in the early 1900s inside the factories of industrial America shaped the assumptions that still run most companies, most schools, and most families today. Taylor was an engineer who believed businesses were being run inefficiently. His solution was to treat the management of human beings as a science. Observe, measure, optimize. Figure out the single most efficient motion for every task, codify it, and then reward workers who follow it exactly and penalize those who don't. He called it scientific management. And it worked. Productivity climbed. Output increased. The Industrial Revolution accelerated. But underneath the system was an assumption so foundational that almost nobody said it out loud. Workers are like parts in a complicated machine. They move when you engage them, they stop when you don't. The right reward produces the right behavior. The right punishment eliminates the wrong one. This was Motivation 2.0, and for a world of repetitive, rule-based, follow-the-instructions work, it was a genuine achievement.
Okay, so for a factory floor doing the same thing 8 hours a day, that probably does make sense. You need people to show up and do the task.
It makes complete sense for that. And here's the thing Pink doesn't let us forget. Motivation 2.0 wasn't wrong. It was designed for something specific. The trouble started when we kept using it after the something specific disappeared. Here's where it gets interesting. Pink traces the assumptions of Motivation 2.0 through the entire 20th century and finds they never really got updated. They got softened. Dress codes relaxed. Schedules became more flexible. Managers started saying things like empowerment and engagement. But the core assumption stayed the same, that people need external pressure to perform, and that the right mix of reward and punishment is how you create that pressure. And by the time the economy shifted from factory work to knowledge work, from algorithmic tasks to heuristic ones, the old operating system was running in environments it was never designed for, without anyone noticing, without anyone questioning it. Pink draws a distinction that runs through everything else in the book: algorithmic work versus heuristic work. An algorithmic task has a clear path, a set of instructions, a right answer you reach by following the steps. Think filling out a form, running a standard report, processing transactions. There's an algorithm for it. Heuristic tasks has no algorithm, no natural path. You have to experiment, invent, discover. Think designing a campaign, solving a technical problem no one has solved before, writing something that actually lands. During most of the 20th century, most work was algorithmic. Even high-status jobs like accounting, law, programming could be reduced to scripts and formulas, a right way. Do it the right way.
And now most work has shifted toward the heuristic side.
The consulting firm McKinsey estimated that in the United States, 70% of job growth now comes from heuristic work. Routine tasks are being automated, moved offshore, or eliminated. What remains, the work that still requires a human, tends to be creative, novel, judgment-based. Exactly the kind of work Motivation 2.0 handles badly. And here's the finding Pink returns to again and again. For algorithmic tasks, external rewards work reasonably well. They focus attention, increase effort, help people move faster down a known path. But for heuristic tasks, the same rewards tend to narrow focus in exactly the wrong direction. They create tunnel vision when what's needed is peripheral vision. They produce short-term compliance when what's needed is long-term engagement. The world changed, the model didn't.
Okay, I think I've got this. The argument is that money doesn't actually matter. You want people to be motivated. Tell them their work is meaningful. Give it purpose. Pay them whatever you can afford, and the meaning takes care of the rest.
That's probably the most common misread of this book, and it's close, but there's a critical piece you've shifted.
What did I miss?
Pink is very specific about this. Baseline pay matters enormously. If someone isn't paid adequately, if their compensation isn't fair, motivation collapses, no matter how meaningful the work is. You cannot skip the foundation. What Pink argues is this. Once pay is adequate and fair, adding if-then rewards on top of interesting work tends to backfire. Not because money is bad, but because of how the incentive is structured. Announce a reward before the task, tie it to a specific outcome, and you trigger psychological effects that are consistently harmful for creative work.
So it's not money versus meaning. It's about when the money is offered and how.
Exactly. That if-then structure is the problem. And why it's a problem comes down to what happens inside the brain when a reward is introduced, which gets strange. And we're going to look at that next. Pink introduces 3 ways the old system no longer fits how the world works. He calls them compatibility problems. The first is how we organize what we do. Open source software, Linux, Apache, Firefox, Wikipedia, is built by unpaid volunteers and often outperforms corporate alternatives. The old model says this shouldn't happen, and yet it does.
Okay, but those are kind of specific to tech culture. Is that really representative?
Pink points to open source cookbooks, medical research, legal briefs, car design, prosthetics. The pattern goes far beyond software. Something about how people choose to spend their time when no one is paying them and no one is watching doesn't fit Motivation 2.0 at all. The second problem is how we think about people. Behavioral economics has shown again and again that humans are not rational, self-interested calculators. We're more irrational, more social, more generous, more strange. And a system built on rational calculation keeps producing surprises. The third problem, and this is the deepest one, is the nature of work itself. Pink uses a problem from 1945 to show this clearly. You're given a candle, a book of matches, and a box of tacks. Your task is to attach the candle to a wall so the wax doesn't drip. Most people try to tack the candle directly. Doesn't work. Some try melting it against the wall. Also doesn't work. Eventually, most people figure it out. Empty the box, tack the box to the wall, use it as a shelf. It's a heuristic problem. There's no formula. You have to see the box differently.
Okay, I think I would have gotten that. Eventually.
Most people do, eventually. Here's where it gets interesting. Researchers ran this experiment again, but this time they offered cash rewards for solving it faster. The group offered money took significantly longer. Not a little longer, significantly, because the reward narrowed their focus. It pulled their attention toward the outcome, the prize, at the exact moment they needed broad, creative thinking. The incentive blocked the insight. And that's just one experiment. There are dozens. Pink frames this around 2 types of behavior, type X and type I. Type X is driven by external rewards. The outcome is the point. Money, status, recognition. That's the engine. Type I is driven by the work itself, the challenge, the growth, the meaning. External rewards are welcome, but they're not the engine.
So type X people don't care about the work. They just want the payoff.
Not quite. They can care, but their primary focus is external. And over time, that focus produces different outcomes and different costs. The research shows something consistent. Type I people outperform type X people in the long run, not because they always work harder, sometimes the opposite, but because their motivation doesn't run out. It renews. Intrinsic motivation is like clean energy, self-sustaining, without the side effects.
And most of us have been trained our whole lives to be more type X, by schools, by jobs, by everything.
Pink would say not trained, conditioned, slowly, without consent, without awareness. And whether that conditioning can be reversed, whether you can get back to type I, is something he answers directly. But first, we need to understand just how badly the old system fails, because the evidence on that is not sudden. The evidence doesn't come from theory or philosophy or intuition. It comes from experiments, run in labs, run in the real world, across cultures, across income levels, across age groups. And what those experiments found is one of the most consistent and most ignored bodies of research in behavioral science. And that's where we're going next. Mark Twain understood something that most of behavioral science took another 100 years to prove. In Chapter 2 of Tom Sawyer, Tom is given the dreary task of whitewashing a long fence. He doesn't want to do it, but when a friend arrives and mocks him, Tom pretends the work is a privilege, a rare opportunity, not a chore. His friend asks to try. Tom refuses until the friend offers his apple in exchange for a turn with the brush. More boys arrive. Same result. By the end of the afternoon, Tom is sitting in the shade, eating their food, while they paint the fence for him. Over and over. With enthusiasm. Twain draws the principle out explicitly. Work is what you are obliged to do. Play is what you are not obliged to do. The moment you make something obligatory or reward-dependent, you've changed what it is. Pink calls this the Sawyer effect, and he argues it's one of the most reliably produced findings in the entire history of motivation research.
So you're saying that paying people to do something can actually make them enjoy it less? That seems backwards.
It seems backwards. The research suggests for certain kinds of tasks, it's reliably true. In the early 1970s, researchers ran a study with preschool children. They identified kids who, during free play, consistently chose to draw. Then they divided those children into 3 groups. The first group was told in advance, if you draw, you'll receive a certificate. The second group drew without any mention of a reward, but received the same certificate afterwards. The third group drew and received nothing. 2 weeks later, during free play, they observed what the children chose to do.
And the kids who got the certificate were more into it?
The children who had been promised the certificate in advance showed significantly less interest in drawing. They spent far less time doing it. 2 weeks later, the reward had reached in and turned their play into work. The children who received a surprise reward and those who received nothing showed no decline at all. The crucial detail is this: it wasn't the reward itself that caused the damage, it was the anticipation. The children who got a surprise reward were fine, but the moment you say, if you do this, then you'll get that, you change the meaning of the activity. You're telling them implicitly, this isn't worth doing on its own, and that signal gets internalized. The activity shifts from something chosen to something performed for a payoff. This isn't a one-off finding. Across decades of research, the conclusion repeats. Expected contingent rewards tend to reduce intrinsic motivation. Now here's where it gets even interesting. Researchers ran another study, this time with real money. Participants performed tasks requiring skill, creativity, and focus. Some were offered a small reward, some a medium reward, and some a very large reward.
Okay, and the high incentive group performed best.
In 8 out of 9 tasks, the high incentive group performed worse. Let me give you both findings together. Higher incentives led to worse performance, not slightly worse, measurably worse. And separately, large-scale analysis of corporate pay-for-performance systems reached the same conclusion. Financial incentives can have a negative impact on performance.
Wait, the same institutions that believe in incentives are saying they don't work.
That's exactly why it matters. When the system produces evidence against its own assumptions, that's not ideology, that's a result. And it's not just performance, it shows up in behavior too. In one study, people were asked to donate blood. Without payment, over half chose to donate. When a small payment was introduced, participation dropped, almost in half.
How does offering money make people less likely to help?
Because you've changed the meaning of the act. Blood donation is a moral decision. People do it because it helps someone else. But when you introduce money, you turn it into a transaction, and now it's evaluated differently. As a transaction, it's not worth it. As a moral act, it was. Pink calls this crowding out. The external reward doesn't add to the internal motivation, it replaces it. There's only room for one logic at a time, and when the reward takes over, the original reason disappears. This shows up in unexpected places. Daycare centers introduced a fine for parents who arrived late. The idea was simple: discourage lateness. But something strange happened. Late pickups didn't decrease, they increased. And even after the fine was removed, the behavior stayed elevated.
Wait, removing the fine didn't fix it?
No, because the fine had changed the psychology of the situation. Before the fine, late pickups carried a social cost. You were inconveniencing someone. There was a relationship involved. After the fine, it became a price, and the price was affordable. Parents didn't feel guilty anymore. They felt like they were paying for a service. And once that shift happened, it didn't reverse. Across all of these examples, the pattern is consistent. You introduce an external reward into a situation that already has its own internal motivation, and instead of strengthening it, you weaken it, distort it, or replace it entirely.
All right, so the conclusion is clear. Remove the rewards, get rid of bonuses, no more incentives, and performance goes up.
That's a reasonable conclusion, and it's almost right. But there's an important nuance.
What am I missing?
There's a difference between 2 types of rewards: if-then rewards and now-that rewards. If then is announced in advance. If you do this, you get that. That's what creates the problem. Now that is different. It comes after. Now that you've done this well, here's something in recognition. Unexpected rewards and genuine positive feedback don't carry the same negative effects. In some cases, they can actually enhance motivation.
So it's not about removing rewards, it's about when and how they're used.
Exactly. And what kind. Honest, specific feedback after good work is very different from a reward announced before the task begins. They may both be rewards, but they operate in completely different ways. So the real question isn't rewards or no rewards, it's what kind of work, what kind of reward, offered when, and in what context. For routine tasks, external rewards can work just fine. There's not much intrinsic motivation to disrupt. But for work that requires creativity, judgment, or real engagement, the kind of work we care about most, that if-then structure tends to produce the opposite of what we want. That's what the science shows. And it leads to a deeper question. What does work look like when it's built around what actually motivates people? Pink has an answer, and it starts with 3 ideas. There's a state where time stops mattering, where you forget to check your phone, where hours pass and feel like minutes, where the work and the person doing it become, briefly, the same thing. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent 30 years studying that state. He called it flow. And what he found changes how we think about motivation entirely. In the early 1970s, Csikszentmihalyi asked a simple question. When do people feel most alive? Not most comfortable, not most relaxed, most alive. He studied artists, chess players, surgeons, factory workers, mountain climbers, and mothers. Across all of them, the same pattern appeared. Total absorption in the task, clear goals, immediate feedback, a challenge that slightly exceeds your ability. Time dissolves. Self-consciousness disappears. He called this state flow.
So this is when you're totally in the zone. Athletes talk about it, musicians. It's when you're just locked in.
Exactly. And here's what matters. Flow isn't a reward for doing good work. It is the experience of doing good work under the right conditions. It's intrinsic motivation in its purest form. There was an experiment that Pink describes. Participants listed small activities they genuinely enjoyed. Then they eliminated them for 48 hours. They still worked, they still ate, they still lived normally, but no enjoyable activities. Within 2 days, people started showing symptoms similar to anxiety. They couldn't focus, they became restless, irritable. One person even walked into a wall and broke their glasses. 48 hours without flow led to near psychiatric effects.
48 hours? That's it?
That's it. The conclusion was simple. Flow isn't a luxury, it's oxygen. Pink organizes intrinsic motivation into 3 elements. He calls them nutrients. Without them, engagement fades. With them, performance transforms. The first is autonomy, the desire to direct your own life. It's not about independence. It's about having control over what you do, when you do it, how you do it, and who you do it with. The difference between a player and a pawn.
Okay, but most jobs don't work like that. You can't just do whatever you want.
Not entirely, but there are examples. Atlassian gives engineers 1 day per quarter to work on anything they want. No restrictions, no oversight. They call it FedEx Day. Deliver something overnight. Some of their most successful features came from that day. Google's 20% time created Gmail, Google News, and Google Translate. 3M's version produced Post-it notes. There was a study of 320 small businesses. Companies that gave employees real autonomy grew 4 times faster and had 1/3 the turnover. 4 times the growth, 1/3 the turnover. Not from paying more, from trusting people. Pink's argument is that traditional management is incompatible with autonomy, and the solution isn't better management, it's a different premise. The second element is mastery, the urge to get better at something that matters. Carol Dweck studied how people think about ability. She found 2 mindsets, a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. People with a fixed mindset believe talent is innate. You either have it or you don't. Challenges become tests. Failure feels threatening. Effort feels like weakness. People with a growth mindset see ability as something you build. Challenges are opportunities. Failure is information. Effort is the path forward. And consistently, the growth mindset leads to mastery.
So you just tell yourself you're here to learn, not to win. Set learning goals. Done.
That's a start, but it goes deeper.
I think mindset is the whole thing. Reframe your thinking. Tell yourself you're growing. That's it.
Self-talk matters, but the deeper layer is what you believe about ability. If you believe talent is fixed, difficulty feels proof you don't have it. Effort feels like failure. Easy success becomes the goal. But if you believe ability grows, difficulty becomes the path. Effort becomes the mechanism. Setbacks become data.
So it's not just goals. It's what difficulty means to you.
Exactly, and that's harder to change. But it can change, with the right conditions, over time. Pink describes mastery as an asymptote. You can get closer and closer, but never arrive. Even at the highest level, there's always more. That's not a flaw. That's the design. The gap is what makes the pursuit worth it. The third element is purpose, the need to do something for something larger than yourself. There was a study with call center workers. One group read about personal benefits of the job, skills, money. Another group read letters from students who received scholarships. The second group raised more than twice as much money. No new training, no extra incentives, just a reminder of who their work helped.
So they didn't work harder, they just knew why they were working.
Exactly, and that doubled performance. Another study tracked graduates after entering the workforce. Some pursued profit goals, wealth, status. Others pursued purpose goals, learning, contribution, relationships. Those pursuing profit goals reported higher well-being, less anxiety, but here's the surprising part. Those achieving profit goals didn't become happier. They became more anxious, more depressed.
They got what they wanted, and it made things worse.
Yes, because those goals crowd out what actually drives well-being. You hit the target and realize it was never the point. Here's the irony. Organizations say they want autonomy, creativity, and purpose. Then they build systems of control, surveillance, metrics, incentives. They say one thing, they build another.
Because that's the system they know. They don't have a better model.
And the transition isn't simple. Autonomy doesn't remove accountability. It changes it from control to trust. What Pink offers isn't a list of tips. It's a model of what people actually need. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Together, they create what he calls type 1 behavior, people driven from within. And over time, they outperform those driven by external pressure, not because they try harder, because their motivation renews itself.
So this isn't abstract. You can build for this. Companies, teachers, even individuals.
Exactly. And the results are real. Consider this. Wikipedia wasn't built despite a lack of rewards. It was built because of intrinsic ones: autonomy, mastery, purpose. No salaries, 17 million articles, hundreds of languages. The most ambitious collaborative project in history, running on this exact model. That's not an accident. That's the argument. And we'll come back to that. But first, the close. Now, let's go back to where we started with the study and take a look at the findings. They brought participants into a lab, gave them a series of tasks, some simple, some requiring focus, problem solving, creativity. Then, they did what every system assumes works. They offered rewards. Small rewards, medium rewards, and very large rewards. The expectation was obvious. Higher reward, better performance. But that's not what happened. For the simple mechanical tasks, the ones you can do almost on autopilot, higher rewards worked exactly as expected. Better pay, better performance. But for anything that required thinking, even a little, the pattern flipped. The higher the reward, the worse the performance. People became more anxious, more narrow, more focused on the reward than the problem in front of them. They made more mistakes, took longer, missed obvious solutions. In 8 of the 9 tasks, higher incentives led to worse results.
Wait, so the thing we've been using to motivate people, the thing everything is built on, it actually makes people perform worse.
For the kind of work most of us are doing now? Yes. And that's the crack. The crack between what we believe motivates people and what actually does. In 1996, The Economist would have bet everything on Microsoft. The reasoning was ironclad: professional talent, financial backing, strong incentives, careful management. Every lever of Motivation 2.0 pulled in the right direction. And Microsoft lost. Not because they built a bad product, not because they hired the wrong people, but because the model of human motivation underneath the entire enterprise couldn't account for what actually drove the volunteers who built Wikipedia. Autonomy over what they worked on, mastery they developed over years of genuine contribution, and a purpose that needed no salary to justify showing up.
So Wikipedia isn't just an interesting anomaly, it's actually the whole argument made visible.
Pink says exactly that. Wikipedia isn't a fluke, it's a proof of concept. The most ambitious collaborative knowledge project in human history was built on the exact architecture this book describes, and that architecture is available to anyone who understands it. Pink ends Drive with a thought that I find quietly devastating. We are born type 1. Children, left to themselves, seek flow with the inevitability of a natural law. The curiosity, the absorption, the intrinsic drive to master something simply because the mastering is satisfying. It's there from the beginning. It requires no installation. Something changes it. schools that run on external evaluation, jobs that structure every moment around compliance, systems that reward performance, monitor attendance, and gradually teach people that the purpose of effort is the outcome, not the work. The operating system was always a layer on top, not the thing itself.
So the whole time I was blaming myself for not being motivated enough, the environments I was in were doing that.
Pink would say probably yes. Not in every case, not as an excuse for everything, but for a significant number of people in a significant number of situations, the problem was never the person, it was the operating system. What Drive offers isn't just a critique of how institutions run, it's a reframe of the question itself. We've been asking, how do I motivate people? How do I motivate myself? How do I get more out of less faster with the right incentives? Pink's answer is that this is the wrong question. Motivation, genuine, durable, high-quality motivation, isn't something you install in someone from outside. It's something that already exists and can be supported, or something that exists and is being suppressed by the environment around it. The right question isn't how to create motivation, it's how to stop destroying it.
And the tools for that are autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
And knowing the difference between an if-then reward that will undermine the very thing you're trying to build and a now-that acknowledgement that reinforces it without corrupting it. Drive is a book that rewards a full reading. The experimental evidence in the middle section is detailed enough to satisfy skeptics, and the practical section Pink builds out later grounds it for anyone thinking about applying these ideas in their own work, their organization, or their family. But the core argument, the operating system is outdated, the science has been ignored for 30 years, and the alternative is built around autonomy, mastery, and purpose, that argument is as clean and as well supported as anything I've encountered in this space.
I'll be honest, I came into this thinking this was going to be another work should be fun, motivational speech. It's not that at all.
No, it's considerably more unsettling than that.
In the best way. Honestly, if any of this landed for you, just go read it. It's one of those books where you keep stopping to think about your own situation.
The question isn't whether you have drive. The science suggests you were born with it. Every child Pink describes, absorbed, curious, pushing towards mastery without being asked, that was you once. The question is whether the environments you've been in have been conditions for that drive to surface, or whether they've been slowly and invisibly suppressing it. And whether, having read this, you might build something different.
Can't wait for what comes next.
You and me both. And if you want to make sure you don't miss out, please subscribe. We'll be here.